There is a kind of love that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with flowers or grand gestures. It arrives quietly, in the middle of someone's worst night, wearing ordinary clothes and asking for nothing in return. This is a story about people who chose love when logic said don't. Remember that. It matters before we begin. By the time this night was over, 3 lives would be permanently changed. One would be destroyed. One would be saved. And one, the one nobody expected, would finally begin to live for the first time in years. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's start where it matters. The lobby of the Grandview Continental Hotel was the kind of place that made people walk differently. Marble floors, 12-foot ceilings, a chandelier that cast everything in warm gold light designed to remind you that some people had more than you, and they wanted you to know it. Ethan Seo crossed that lobby the way he crossed every room, without hurry, without noise, without the need to be noticed. He was 37 years old, Korean American, the kind of quietly handsome that only became visible when you looked twice. Dark eyes, a gray suit that fit too well to be off the rack, but carried no logo worth mentioning. He had a phone in one hand and a coffee he hadn't touched in the other. He was thinking about a board meeting scheduled for Monday morning and whether the quarterly numbers would hold. He was not thinking about love. He had stopped thinking about love a long time ago. He took a seat in the corner of the hotel bar, not because he was drinking, but because it was quiet and had a clean sightline to the ballroom entrance where the Hargrove Anniversary Gala was spilling light and music into the corridor. He had been invited. He always got invited to these things. He almost never went inside. What happened next was not something he planned. It was not something anyone planned. The Hargrove Anniversary Gala had been Vivian's idea from the beginning. 5 years of marriage, she had told her husband David. 5 years deserved to be celebrated properly. Not dinner for 2, not a weekend away. A real celebration. The ballroom, the catering, the guest list that read like a directory of everyone in their social circle. 240 people who had watched them build their life together. Vivian Hargrove had spent 4 months planning this evening. She had chosen the venue, the flowers, white peonies and deep green eucalyptus, the 4-course menu, the jazz quartet, the favors on every table. She had chosen her dress herself, deep burgundy silk, because David had once told her she looked beautiful in that color. That was 3 years ago. He had stopped saying things like that. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself marriages went through seasons, and this was just one of the difficult ones. She told herself tonight would remind him. Tonight would be the night they came back to each other. She was wrong about almost everything. The gala started beautifully. The room looked exactly as she had imagined. The guests arrived in waves, colleagues, friends, family. Her mother squeezed her hand at the entrance and whispered that the room was stunning. Vivian smiled until her face ached. David gave a toast at 8 o'clock. He stood at the microphone with the champagne flute and looked out at 240 people who loved them, or at least knew them, and talked about 5 years. He talked about building something together. He talked about the future. He did not look at Vivian once while he spoke. She noticed. She filed it away. She kept smiling. It was at 9:15, during the second course, that everything came apart. David stood up from the head table without warning. He pushed back his chair so hard it scraped against the marble floor, and the sound cut through the room like a blade. Conversation stopped at the nearest tables. Then the next. Then the next, until the silence spread outward like a ripple across still water. "I need to say something," David said. His voice was too loud for the room. "I need everyone to hear this." Vivian looked at him. Something cold moved through her chest. "I have spent 5 years," David continued, "building a life with a woman I thought I knew. 5 years of believing in something that turned out to be built on her terms, her silence, her closed doors." The room was completely still. Vivian heard her own heartbeat. "She can't give me what I need," David said. "She has known this for 2 years, and she never told me. She let me believe, let us both believe, that things would change." He set down his champagne flute. "They're not going to change, and I am done pretending otherwise." 240 people watched Vivian Hargrove's face. She did not cry. She was too shocked to cry. She sat very straight in her burgundy silk dress and felt the room tilt slowly beneath her, the way a ship tilts before it goes under. "I am ending this marriage," David said. "Tonight, in front of everyone." Someone gasped. Someone's phone appeared. Then another. Then 10 more. "David," her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Please, don't do this here." "You should have thought about that," he said, "before you kept lying to me." And then, because humiliation apparently had no floor, the ballroom doors opened. A woman walked in wearing a cream dress that left nothing to interpretation. She was beautiful in a calculated way, the kind of beauty assembled rather than inherited. She walked directly to David's side without hesitation, without apology, without once looking at Vivian. David put his arm around her. "This is Serena," he said to the room. "She has given me what my wife couldn't." The silence that followed was the worst kind, filled with everyone's private thoughts. 240 people staring at Vivian Hargrove. 240 people with phones in their hands. 240 people doing absolutely nothing. Vivian stood up. Her legs moved before her mind made the decision. She thought she might walk out. She thought she might say something. Instead, the room spun. Her vision went white at the edges. She grabbed the edge of the table and missed. She went down between her chair and the table, her dress pooling around her, one hand still reaching for something that wasn't there. 240 people watched. Nobody moved. Ethan Seo had been watching from the corridor for approximately 4 minutes before the woman collapsed. He had seen enough in those 4 minutes to understand what was happening. He had seen the husband's face, the performance of it, the careful staging, the way the man had checked the room before he spoke to make sure everyone was watching. He had seen the woman in the cream dress enter with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed this entrance. He had seen 240 people reach for their phones. He had not seen a single person stand up to help. When the woman in the burgundy dress went down, Ethan set his untouched coffee on the bar ledge and walked into the ballroom. He moved through the crowd the way he moved through every room, without hurry, without noise. People parted without quite knowing why. He reached her in 11 seconds. He knelt beside her, checked her pulse, steady, just faint, and looked at her face. She was conscious, barely. Her eyes were open but unfocused, trying to find something stable to look at. "I've got you," he said quietly. "Don't try to move yet." Her eyes found his face. Something in them shifted. Confusion. Then a fragile, desperate relief. The way a drowning person looks at something solid. He was sliding one arm beneath her shoulders when he heard footsteps. "Get your hands off my wife." Ethan looked up slowly. David Hargrove was walking toward him from the stage, his jaw set, his arm no longer around the woman in cream. He looked like a man who had just realized his performance had been interrupted by someone who hadn't been given a script. Ethan did not move his hands. "She is having a medical episode," Ethan said. His voice was very calm. "She needs water and space, not an audience. I said get your hands off her." David was 6 feet away now. His voice had the particular edge of a man who was used to being the most important person in any room. "You don't know who you were dealing with." Ethan stood up slowly. He was slightly shorter than David, slightly leaner. He had no particular physical advantage. He didn't need one. "Touch her again," Ethan said calmly, "and I will make sure you regret it in every way that matters to you." The words were quiet, measured, not a threat. A statement of fact delivered in the same tone someone might use to observe that it was going to rain. The entire banquet hall fell silent. 240 people stopped breathing. David Hargrove opened his mouth, then closed it. Something in Ethan's expression, the absolute stillness of it, the complete absence of performance, made him hesitate in a way that the entire room noticed. The man in the gray suit was not afraid, was not posturing, was not trying to impress anyone. He simply meant what he said. "Who are you?" David asked. His voice had lost an edge. "My name is Ethan Seo." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a card, holding it between two fingers. "I am the principal investor of SEO Capital Group, which holds a 40% interest in the Hargrove Group's primary lender. Which means your business, your assets, and your credit lines exist partly because I allow them to." He set the card on the nearest table without looking away from David. "I'd suggest you think carefully about your next sentence." The room was absolutely still. David Hargrove looked at the card, then at Ethan, then back at the card. The woman in cream had gone very quiet. Ethan turned back to Vivian, who had pushed herself to a seated position and was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. He crouched back down beside her. "Can you stand?" he asked. "I think so," she whispered. "Take your time." He helped her to her feet carefully, one hand at her elbow. She was unsteady but upright. She looked at the room, at 240 people watching her, and something moved across her face. Not shame, not defeat. Something harder than that. Something that looked quietly like the beginning of dignity reassembling itself. "Thank you," she said so quietly only he could hear. "Let's get you out of here," he replied. Outside, the night air was cool and clean. The valet looked up from his stand and quickly looked away when he saw Ethan's expression. Vivian stood on the steps of the Grandview Continental and breathed. Just breathed. The sounds of the gala were muffled now, filtered through glass and distance. She could feel her heartbeat returning to something normal. "You don't have to stay," she said without looking at him. "I know," Ethan said. She looked at him then. He was standing a careful distance away, close enough to help if she needed it, far enough to give her space She noticed that about him, the deliberateness of it. "Why did you do that?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, not the silence of someone searching for an answer, the silence of someone deciding how honest to be. "Because someone needed to," he said finally, "and no one else was going to. If this story is already landing somewhere deep, you already know what to do." Vivian looked away. Her eyes were filling. She blinked hard. "My car's around the corner," she said. "I'll be fine." "Where will you go?" The question caught her off guard. Such a simple question. She realized she didn't have an answer. The house was David's. The plans for the rest of the weekend were David's. The entire future she had been building toward, for 5 years had, in the last hour, turned out to belong to someone else entirely. "I don't know yet," she admitted. Ethan nodded slowly. He pulled out his phone and typed something briefly. "My assistant will arrange a suite at this hotel for tonight. No obligation. Just somewhere safe to land. I can't accept that." "You're not accepting anything. It's a hotel room." He looked at her directly. "You've had enough taken from you tonight. Let someone give you something for once." She stared at him. This stranger in a gray suit who had walked into the worst moment of her life without being asked and rearranged it. "I don't know you," she said. "No," he agreed. "But you know that I stepped in when 240 people didn't. Sometimes that's enough to start with." She was quiet for a long moment. "Vivian," she said finally. "My name is Vivian Hargrove." "Ethan Seo." He didn't offer his hand, just his name, simple and clean. "You mentioned your company," she said. "David's lender." "Yes." Was that true? Or were you just saying it to make him back down? Ethan looked at her evenly. "I don't say things I don't mean." Something in Vivian's chest shifted. Quietly. Like a window opening in a room that had been closed too long. "The suite," she said. "Just for tonight." "Just for tonight," he agreed. He walked her inside. And neither of them could have told you exactly when tonight became something more than that. She woke at 6 in the morning in a hotel suite that smelled like cedar and clean linen, and nothing like her life. For exactly 4 seconds, Vivian didn't remember. Then she did. She sat up slowly and looked at the room. King bed, floor-to-ceiling windows, the city still dark beyond the glass. Someone had left a bottle of water and a note on the bedside table. She picked up the note. "Room is yours for as long as you need. Breakfast can be sent up. E. Isio." She read it twice. Then she set it down and went to the window and stood there for a long time watching the city wake up. Somewhere in this city, David was waking up too, with Serena. In the house Vivienne had chosen the furniture for, the paint colors, the kitchen curtains that let in the morning light, she thought she would cry again. Instead, she felt something unexpected. A slow, quiet anger that had the texture of clarity, like fog burning off to reveal the actual shape of things. Her phone had 47 missed calls. She turned it face down. She showered, dressed in yesterday's clothes, and called her younger sister Priya, who answered on the first ring because of course she had already seen the videos. "Vi." Priya's voice was careful and warm in equal measure. "Tell me where you are." "A hotel." "I'm okay." "You're not okay, but you will be." A pause. Who was the man? Everyone is asking about the man in the gray suit. Vivian looked at the note on the bedside table. "Someone who helped. He's all over the internet. Someone made a compilation of him walking through the crowd. It's at 2 million views already. Of course it is. He looked at David like David was a mild inconvenience. Despite everything, Vivian almost smiled. He did. Come stay with me, Priya said. I'll come get you right now. I will. Just give me an hour. She hung up and looked at the note one more time. Then she typed a number she hadn't asked for, but somehow had anyway. The hotel had included it when she checked in under his arrangement. This is Vivian. Thank you for the room. I'm leaving this morning to stay with my sister. I wanted to say thank you properly before I went. The reply came in 4 minutes. You don't owe me a thank you. How are you feeling? She stared at that question. How many people in the last 12 hours had asked her how she was feeling? Not about the situation, not about David, just her. How was she feeling? Like I've been hit by something large and fast, she typed. But I'm standing. That's everything, he wrote back. Take care of yourself today. She put her phone in her bag and picked up her coat and walked to the door. Then she stopped, turned back, picked up the note from the bedside table and folded it and put it in her coat pocket. She didn't examine why. The next 3 weeks were the hardest Vivian had ever lived through. Not because of David, though the divorce proceedings that started almost immediately were cold and efficient and designed to minimize what she received. Not because of the public nature of it, though the videos had spread further than anyone expected, and her name trended twice in 1 week, always paired with words like humiliated, and she had to rebuild her life from nothing. Not even because of Serena, who gave a soft-focused interview to a lifestyle magazine about following her heart that Priya read aloud in outrage while Vivian sat quietly and said nothing. It was hard because of the silence of a life that had been built around another person and was now just architecture, rooms with no purpose, habits with no recipient. She would start to text David something and remember mid-sentence that channel no longer existed. She stayed with Priya. Priya fed her, argued with her, made her leave the apartment every day, even when Vivian would have been perfectly happy to stay in bed and dissolve. She had been publicly discarded like she was nothing. And the world had watched, and now she had to figure out how to walk back into it. She was not the first woman to survive this. She would not be the last, but surviving was different from living. And living was what Priya was insisting on. You need a project, Priya declared on day 11. Something that's yours. I need a divorce lawyer, Vivian said. You have a divorce lawyer. You need something that belongs only to you. Vivian had spent 5 years building around David's career, David's social world, David's vision of their future. She had left her job at the design firm 3 years ago. She had given up her apartment, her savings, her Sundays, her habits, her independent sense of direction. She hadn't noticed it happening. That was the thing that kept her up at night. She hadn't noticed. Ethan texted her on day 14, not about anything particular. He had read about an architectural restoration project in the city and thought of her. She had mentioned, in their brief conversation outside the hotel, that she had a design background. He sent a link. Nothing more. She stared at it for a long time. Then she wrote back, "How did you remember that?" "I pay attention," he replied. "Are you doing okay?" And somehow, despite everything she had recently learned about trusting people who seemed steady, she told him the truth. That she wasn't okay yet, but she was working on it. that she had started drawing again for the first time in 3 years and didn't know what to do with that feeling. That feeling is important, he wrote. Don't put it down. You sound like you know something about putting things down, she replied. A longer pause. I know something about it, he admitted. More than I'd like. She wanted to ask. She didn't. Not yet. They texted in the evenings after that, briefly, without agenda. He never pushed, never asked for anything, never made her feel like the conversations were building towards something he wanted. He just showed up in her phone like a quiet constant, the way certain people make themselves known, not through force, but through patience. At the end of week 3, he asked if she wanted to get coffee. Not dinner, not a date. Coffee. Yes, she said before she had time to second-guess herself. The cafe he suggested was not the kind of place she expected from a man who held 40% interest in major lenders. It was small and warm and slightly chaotic. Mismatched mugs, a blackboard menu, local art on the walls. That didn't quite coordinate. It smelled of dark roast and toasted bread and something cinnamon. He was already there when she arrived. No phone in hand, just a cup of coffee and the window. You found it, he said. Your directions were very precise. She sat across from him. Which feels consistent. Something close to a smile crossed his face. He had one of those faces that held back more than it showed. Not cold, just careful. Like someone who had learned to measure. How are you sleeping? He asked. Better than I was. Worse than I want to be. She wrapped her hands around the mug. You? Not great, he said simply. No elaboration. Why? She asked. He looked at her, that careful, measuring look. There are things I'm working through, he said. Nothing dramatic. Just things. She recognized that particular answer. The answer of someone who had things they weren't ready to share yet. She didn't push. They talked for 2 hours. She told him about growing up in Vancouver with Priya, about her mother who collected antique clocks, about her father who had died when she was 19 and left a hole in the family's architecture. They had all quietly reorganized themselves around. She told him about the design firm, about the projects she had been proudest of, about the exact moment she had realized she had made a mistake leaving and had chosen to ignore that realization for 2 more years. He told her about his parents, his mother Korean, his father American, both business people, both driven, and about growing up in the space between 2 cultures where he was never quite fully either. He told her about building SEO Capital from the ground up after his business partner walked away with half their client base. He told her about Seoul and Seattle and the way cities had textures that either fit you or didn't. He did not tell her about the diagnosis. She noticed there was something he wasn't telling her. She was perceptive. She had always been perceptive, which made it worse somehow, that she had missed what was happening in her own marriage. With Ethan, she noticed the small, careful pauses, the way certain questions turned him slightly inward before he answered. She noticed the medication he took quietly at the end of his coffee without comment, tucking the small pill case back into his jacket pocket, with the practiced ease of someone for whom this was long routine. She didn't ask. Not yet. Outside the cafe, they stood on the sidewalk in the November afternoon. The light was going. The city smelled of impending rain. Can I see you again? She asked. She kept her voice steady. She had decided in the last 10 minutes that she was not going to pretend this was only coffee. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Warmth, she thought, and something underneath it she couldn't name yet. "Yes," he said. "Whenever you want." She walked to the subway and didn't look back, but she was smiling in a way she hadn't expected to smile for a long time. They saw each other 11 times in the next 6 weeks. Coffee became walks. Walks became dinners. Dinners became the kind of evenings that end at midnight with both people surprised by how long it has been. He met Priya, who interrogated him with the focused energy of a woman who had watched her sister get publicly dismantled and was not about to let it happen again. He answered every question directly and without defensiveness, which was apparently the right answer, because afterward, Priya told Vivian he was terrifyingly composed in a tone that meant she approved. Vivian started drawing again. Real work, projects, concepts, a proposal she was quietly assembling for a restoration client. Ethan asked to see her sketches one evening and looked at them with the focused attention of someone who actually understood what they were looking at. "You're very good," he said. "You don't know enough about design to say that." "I know enough about work that has intention behind it." He handed the sketchbook back. "This has intention." She felt something warm and complicated move through her. They were in her new apartment. She had signed a lease in week 4, a small place in a neighborhood she had always liked, but David had considered not the right area. Sitting on her couch with takeout containers between them. It was a Wednesday. Rain against the windows. "Ethan," she said. He looked at her. "What is it that you're not telling me?" He was quiet. Very quiet. The kind of quiet she had learned meant he was weighing something carefully. "What makes you ask?" "The medication you take when you think I'm not watching. The way you cancel things, sometimes with an explanation that's technically true, but not complete. The way you look sometimes, like you're calculating how much time something takes." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking to pressure you. I'm asking because I think you deserve to have someone ask." He set down his food. He looked at the window, then back at her. "I have leukemia," he said. "Chronic myeloid, diagnosed 14 months ago. The treatment has been managing it. I'm not in immediate danger, but the prognosis is uncertain." A pause. "I have good months and difficult ones. The difficult ones are getting more frequent." The room was very still. And if you have ever sat across from someone you were falling for and watched them hand you something heavy and irreversible, you already know exactly what Vivian was feeling in that moment. She didn't look away. She didn't fill the silence with reassurance or questions. She just stayed exactly where she was, looking at him, while the rain continued against the windows. "How long have you known?" she asked finally. 14 months. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I didn't want it to be the first thing you knew about me." His voice was steady, but she could hear what was underneath it. "I wanted you to know me first. The rest of me. Before you decided whether the rest was something you could..." He stopped. "Something you could what?" she said quietly. "Something you could choose to stay with." She looked at him for a long time. "Ethan." Her voice was gentle and certain at once. "You walked into a room full of 240 people, and you were the only one who moved. You have never asked me for anything. You remember things I say weeks after I've said them. You are the first person in years who has made me feel like myself again." She paused. "Did you really think a diagnosis was going to change the direction of this?" Something crossed his face. Something that looked, very briefly, like relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. "I didn't know," he said honestly. "Now you do." She reached across the takeout containers and took his hand. He looked down at their joined hands. Then he turned his hand over and held hers properly. And they sat like that for a long time while the rain came down outside and neither of them said anything else because nothing else needed to be said. After that night, things shifted. Not dramatically, not with any announcement, just the careful distance that had existed in everything about Ethan, the measured quality of how he moved through the world, started to ease slightly, as if he had been carrying something at arm's length for so long that setting it down just a little was a relief he hadn't known he needed. He came to her apartment on Thursdays. She cooked, badly, enthusiastically, without apology. He ate everything she made with the focused appreciation of someone who understood that the cooking was not the point. She went with him to medical appointments twice. She hadn't asked to. He mentioned them once, casually, and she said, "I'll come." And he looked at her like she had said something in a language he had been trying to learn for years. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. The treatment was working, for now. The words "for now" lived in both their minds like a quiet background hum, present, acknowledged, not allowed to be the loudest thing in the room. "What do you want?" Vivian asked him one afternoon. They were in a park, late January, their breath making small clouds. "Not what you're working toward. Not the business. What do you actually want for yourself?" He thought about it seriously. She had learned he took most questions seriously. "To finish something beautiful," he said. "I have spent 15 years building things that are useful. I would like, before whatever happens, to build something beautiful." He looked at her. "I think I might already be doing that." She turned her face into his shoulder to hide the expression that crossed it. He put his arm around her. They walked like that for a long time, not saying anything while the cold came off the lake and the city moved through its winter afternoon, indifferent and beautiful. And Vivian thought about second chances and the specific, unexpected grace of finding one when you weren't looking. The divorce was finalized in February. Vivian's lawyer had been excellent. Priya had found her naturally, and while the settlement was not what 5 years deserved, it was enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to begin. David sent a single text the morning the papers were signed. "I'm sorry for how it happened." She read it twice and deleted it. Not with anger. Just with the clean efficiency of someone who had moved past the need for that particular door. That evening, Ethan came over, and she was quieter than usual. He simply made tea and sat beside her and didn't ask her to explain herself. He just stayed. That was the thing about him. She kept realizing. He stayed. Without drama, without demand, without requiring her to perform recovery or gratitude or progress on any schedule except her own. She was falling in love with him. She had been for months. She had not said it yet because some part of her was still learning to trust the ground she was standing on. But the feeling was there, solid and quiet, like an answer she had been working toward without knowing the question. It was a Tuesday in March when Ethan didn't answer his phone. This was unusual enough that Vivian noticed immediately. He was meticulous about communication, not in a performative way, just in the way of someone who understood that small reliabilities were the building blocks of trust. He always answered or texted within minutes. By the second hour, she called Priya. "He's probably just in a meeting," Priya said in the tone she used when she was not entirely convinced by her own reassurance. "He doesn't have meetings on Tuesday afternoons." By the third hour, Vivian was in a cab. She had a key to his apartment. He had given it to her without ceremony 2 weeks earlier, in the same way he did most things, practically, quietly, as if the significance was obvious and didn't require underlining. She let herself in. He was in the living room, in the armchair by the window. He was awake. She could tell by the quality of his stillness, the controlled nature of it, but he looked worse than she had ever seen him. Gray at the edges, something depleted. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey." His voice was normal, prepared. "Talk to me." He exhaled. "Bad day. The counts are down. Dr. Chen wants to adjust the treatment protocol, which means the next few months are going to be rougher than the last ones." A pause. "I didn't want to call you sounding like this." "Like what?" "Like I'm losing." She crossed the room and sat on the arm of the chair, not across from him, beside him. She put her hand on the back of his neck, gently, the way you would with someone in pain. "You're not losing," she said. "You're having a bad day. Those are different things." "Vivian, you walked into a room full of people and you were the only one who moved," she said quietly. "You don't get to tell me you're losing." She felt him exhale under her hand. "You get to be tired. You get to have a bad day. You get to let me sit here with you. But you don't get to lose. Not today." He was quiet for a long moment. "I'm scared," he said. The words came out simply. No performance, no framing. Just the truth of a person who had spent 14 months being brave and had, in this moment, run out of the energy to be anything other than honest. "I know," she said. "Me too. And we're going to be scared together, because that's what this is." He looked up at her. His eyes were steady, but she could see everything underneath them. The fear, the exhaustion, the profound and complicated gratitude of someone who had stopped expecting to be accompanied through the hard parts. "I love you," he said. "I should have said it sooner, but I kept thinking I was waiting for the right moment, and I think I was just scared of how much I meant it." She slid from the arm of the chair into the chair beside him, which was too small for both of them, and she didn't care at all. "I love you too," she said. Since the cafe, probably before. He pressed his forehead to hers. They stayed like that in the chair by the window while the afternoon light changed and the city moved through its evening. And neither of them needed to say anything else. Spring came, and with it, something unexpected. The new treatment protocol worked. Not perfectly. Medicine was rarely perfect, but significantly. The counts stabilized. Dr. Chen used the word encouraging with the careful restraint of an oncologist who had learned not to deploy optimism carelessly. Ethan did not become someone who talked about second chances. That was not his language. But Vivienne noticed the changes in small ways. He started a project he had been planning for years and never started. a fund that would support design students whose financial circumstances didn't match their talent. He hired two of them directly at SEO Capital in newly created positions. He asked Vivian to build the program. "You want me to run it?" she asked. "I want you to build it," he said. "It should look like you." She built it. It took 4 months, and it was the best work she had ever done. They moved in together in June. Not dramatically. He simply started having more things at her apartment than his own. And one afternoon, they looked at each other over a conversation about a weekend trip, and he said, "Should we just do this properly?" And she said, "Yes." And that was that. Priya cried at the news, which she denied. "I'm not crying," Priya said. "I have allergies." "It's June," Vivian said. "Summer allergies?" Ethan looked quietly amused, which was his version of laughing out loud. The night they finished moving the last of his things, they sat on the floor of the living room surrounded by boxes and ate pizza that Priya had brought uninvited because she could not resist. "I need to make a toast," Priya announced, holding her wine glass. "You always need to make a toast," Vivian said, "because someone always deserves one." Priya looked at Ethan. "You walked into my sister's worst night and you didn't make it about you. You didn't want anything from it. You just helped." She raised her glass. "And then you stayed. That's all. That's what matters." They clinked glasses. Ethan looked at Vivian over the rim of his. She held his gaze. He stayed. They got married the following April. A small ceremony in the garden of a house they had rented for the weekend. 30 people. White flowers, late afternoon light that turned everything gold. Vivian wore a dress she had helped design herself, a detail that Ethan told her was entirely on brand, in a tone that meant it was his favorite thing about her. He said his vows looking directly at her the entire time, without notes, without preamble. She said hers back, and when her voice broke in the middle, he took her hand without looking away. Priya cried. Without pretending to have allergies this time, Dr. Chen attended. This surprised several people. "He is remarkable," Dr. Chen told Priya afterward, in the quiet way of someone who knew more than they could say. "Most people in his situation," he stopped, chose different words. "He just refused to treat it as an ending. I've been doing this work for 20 years. I don't see that often." The years that followed were good ones. Not perfect. Nothing was perfect. And Ethan's health remained a companion they had learned to live alongside rather than a guest they could ask to leave. There were difficult months and good months and months that were ordinary in the particular way that ordinary becomes precious when you understand it might not always be available. Vivian's design practice grew. The Student Fund became one of the more respected programs in its field. She was asked to speak about it at a conference and stood at a podium and talked about the value of building things that outlast you. Ethan sat in the second row and watched her the entire time. His company continued to grow. He hired well, delegated better, and discovered, somewhere in his early 40s, that he was most interested in the parts of his work that built something lasting over the parts that built something profitable. This realization, Vivian told him, had only taken him 40 years. "Some people never get there," he said. "Some people never get the reminder," she replied. He knew exactly what she meant. As for David Hargrove and Serena, that is a story people in certain circles still debate. There are those who say the business difficulties that followed were coincidental. There are those who say otherwise. David's company restructured twice in 3 years. He and Serena moved cities. Their story faded from public interest with the indifference that social media extends to yesterday's spectacle. Vivian did not track it. She had better things to track. One evening in November, the same month it had all begun, 6 years earlier, she found Ethan standing at the window of their apartment. The city was doing its evening thing below them. He was just looking at it. She stood beside him. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm thinking that this was worth it. All of it. Even the parts that were hard." He looked at her. "Especially those parts." She leaned her head against his shoulder. Outside, the city moved through its evening. Thousands of lives, thousands of stories, thousands of moments where someone had to decide whether to move or stay still. The best ones always moved. And somewhere in that same city, 3 miles east, a girl who had grown up without resources and with every reason not to believe the world had space for her was sitting in a design class funded by the SEO Foundation, drawing something she had never before had the tools to draw. She didn't know the story of how the fund had started. She didn't know about the ballroom or the burgundy dress or the man who had walked through a crowd when no one else would. She just knew that someone, somewhere, had believed this was worth building. She drew until the last light was gone, and that quiet, unseen chain from one act of courage to a girl with a pencil in a room she had earned is the thing about choosing love when logic says don't. You can never quite see where it ends. Tell me, what moment hit you the hardest? The ballroom, the chair by the window, or something else entirely? Drop one word in the comments that describes how you're feeling right now. I read every single one. And if you believe in stories about people who choose love when it costs them, subscribe. I collect these stories. I have more waiting for you.